Great. Welcome to another webinar in the Design Systems Virtual Summit. My name is Basha and we're your host, UXPin. UXPin is a full stack design platform. And in case this is your first time encountering us, we offer a platform for prototyping, collaboration, developer handoffs, and documentation, all powered by design systems. If you're interested in checking us out, we do offer a free trial. And we'll drop that link right now into the chat. The virtual summit is sponsored by Atlassian Design, the team focused on building simply powerful experiences for Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, and all Atlassian products. Their team is hiring now in Mountain View and Sydney offices, and you can learn more about their openings at atlassian.com/UXPin. And we're gonna put that link in there as well. So like I said before, all of our sessions are recorded and will be shared with everyone after the summit. And after the talk, please stick around for the Q&A. If you do have any questions, please make sure to use the Q&A box rather than the chat, just to keep things nice and clean. And right now, I have Carl and Jen from athenahealth here, and let's get started. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you, Basha. Hi, I'm Jen Cardello. I've been at athenahealth for 3 years, working on scaling our design and research capabilities. I founded the Design Ops group in January of 2017, and today we're going to talk about one of our Design Ops initiatives, our design system.
Hi, I'm Carl Chu. I've been at athenahealth for about 5 years, and in that time, probably half my time has been spent dealing with design systems related topics. Over the last year, I've been the product owner for Forge, which is the name of the company's design system initiative. Right now, we're about 5 weeks from our official 1.0 launch, so this is a good time to get really a high-level retrospective of many of the organization and program challenges we faced and how we approach them.
So we've organized this talk to explain our particular situation at Athena, the job we're hiring the design system to do, and the strategies and tactics we've employed to get Forge built and ensure adoption throughout athenahealth. So just a disclaimer, this is our story, and every company's is different as we've learned going through this and talking to other people, talking with our consultants, and trying to find out the best way to forge ahead at Athena. So first I want to set some context for the organization that we're in, just so you have some sense of scale. So athenahealth is a 21-year-old company focused in healthcare technology. We make web-based applications that help healthcare providers run their practices and runs in hospitals as well. So this includes revenue cycle software, electronic health records, population health, medication reference sites, hospital ancillary systems, and performance analytics, as well as a whole host of other things we've been expanding into very rapidly. The users of our systems, first and foremost, are doctors and nurses and medical assistants, but we're also building things for care managers and quality managers, receptionists, billers, practice managers, pharmacists, radiologists. It goes on and on. So our never-ending list of roles is something that it keeps us very busy as far as building workflows out for those people in a quality way. So to make good on this really large portfolio of systems and experiences, we have about 200 Scrum teams, and we have close to 850 developers in the US and India. We have about 40 designers that are embedded on our Scrum teams, and about 60 total that are in the product zone. So 40 team members that actually sit on the Scrum teams with product owners and engineers. And many of those are directly servicing specific charters. We also have about 7 tech stacks, I think. There may be more as of last week. We never really know the full answer to that, but there's legacy tech stacks and then tech stacks we adopt through acquisitions. At the end of 2016, we redesigned our design org to help us scale quality experience across our portfolio of products and achieve better outcomes via design. Previously, almost all of our designers were decentralized, so they were living out in the zones. We had designers, researchers, and UX engineers out in the zones, living in their product and program teams. So in 2017, when we reorged and recreated design, we were able to centralize our specialist roles into our newly established design ops zone. And UX engineering was one of the specialties we centralized and grew, and that's the group, along with full stack engineering within design ops that Carl runs. Our charter in design ops is to achieve scale through leverage of our specialist resources. We aim to help our Scrum teams deliver greater value to our customers through the services, frameworks, and systems we build and support. Our customers are the Scrum teams, so they're the product owners, the engineers, and the designers, working across those 200 plus Scrum teams, trying to build great product and deliver value to our customers, our end customers. And in 2018, we have several initiatives that we're focusing on, and the one that's listed first here is the design system, because this is one of our causing not having a consistent or source of truth design system was one of the pain points that we had and have experienced over many years. So to go into that more deeply, we believe that the creation and adoption of an Athena-wide open source design system, open source internal to our organization, will help us achieve the following things. First of all, quality. So generating higher quality end user digital experiences and allowing designers and developers to focus on vision and workflow rather than detailed UI and ensuring the best use of UI patterns. So we don't want them moving pixels around all day. We'd rather they focus on these workflows that are very complicated, and we would like to simplify those. The second thing is velocity, so helping teams to rapidly design, prototype, and build quality responsive web-based desktop and mobile applications. And then the third very important piece to us is consistency. We currently have an ecosystem of products that don't seem very connected. They have a variety of visual styles, they work in different ways, they utilize different patterns. And so ensuring cohesive, consistent experiences across devices in our ecosystem will hopefully reduce cognitive effort as users move throughout that ecosystem and use multiple products that we offer. We additionally believe that the utilization of this design system reduces the amount of time designers spend specifying user interfaces. We would rather allocate more of their highly valuable time to defining experience strategy, so focusing on things that we call vision, blueprint, and workflow definition versus the pixel pushing around the page. And so this has been somewhat of a mindset change, a mental model adjustment that we've had to make in the organization. But over the year that we've been building Forge, it seems to be something that designers are becoming more and more comfortable with. So their job isn't just to be wireframe wranglers, but it's actually to take the kit of parts and make way better things from those. We've developed multiple approaches and channels to make sure we're out in front in terms of communication to limit misperceptions of the effort and detractors. And Carl and I are laughing though, because this still happens from time to time. I think that we were just having a conversation about this. You know, design systems are kind of like de rigueur, like we recognize them in every organization that we talk to. Maybe it's just confirmation bias. They seem pretty obvious and natural to us as designers and front-end developers, but they're not standard in everyone's lexicon and the way they will approach their enterprise. We believe that this is particularly useful in an enterprise where you have many, many Scrum teams that need a source of truth. If you're a startup and you really only need to concern yourself with getting something out the door to have a proof of concept, to have a minimum viable offering, to pivot quickly, you can certainly use a third-party library and even reskin it if you want to. But in our case, what would happen with that is that we wouldn't have a single source of truth for users, for our end users, our Scrum teams to tap into. So they'd always be using someone else's example, grabbing that from the product that last created a date picker or last created a grid. And that's basically the situation we're in right now. And that is not good for end users, and it's not great for consistency. And we do see teams having to reinvent and rebuild the basics over and over again. So this is just to say, like, what seems obvious to us isn't obvious to anyone. So use your communication channels to make sure you're out in front, and also use the best communication channel of one-to-one relationships to get those feelings, deeply held feelings, out of the people who may very well be detractors, because they can multiply that sentiment, and it can be pretty distracting for your team. So one of the things that we did early on was create a memo for leadership early last year to explain what the problems were we were seeing in the organization, how that was tied to things that they were particularly interested in, like design quality and velocity, and then set the stage for getting their backing, and make sure that we were good at getting our pitch right. So we had our elevator pitch, we had our in the room with senior leadership pitch. We could explain what the benefits of doing this were. I can't give you the memo, but I can give you the outline of what we focused on in that letter. So this was like a 12-page memo. It had a lot in it, but basically telling them how far we had come so far, what we thought we could achieve and by when, what the current state was, what the vision was, a definition of design system, because that's another thing that we take for granted. We think everyone knows what that is. It's not the same definition from org to org or from person to person. Some people call a design system, a sketch sticker sheet. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about front-end styling in addition to code, coded components. What the impact we would anticipate this would have, who else has a design system? It doesn't hurt to name drop to get some of that halo effect from other organizations like Salesforce and Intuit. That definitely adds credibility to this. An idea of how we build it and how we'd ensure adoption, how it's different than anything else we currently have, because that's one of the things when you're trying to convince people of building this new thing or switching to this new thing. But we already have the UI toolkit. Right, we have that, but that's not what we're talking about. It doesn't serve the purpose that or solve for the problems that we have. What the goals were, a basic roadmap over our release schedule, and the way we'd measure success. And then the final piece was asking them for the things we needed from them in order to move this forward. So that's an important piece. Why are you telling me this? Because I need these 3 things from you. So this is how we got started early last year. In 2016, I started talking with Brad Frost about how he might be able to add some credibility and direction to our design system dreams. So we had been thinking about this for a while, but hadn't pulled together a Scrum team and didn't have organizational support in order to budget for this. We engaged with Brad in early 2017 and his partners, Dan Mall and Josh Clark, to assess our organization, which is a really important point because every organization is different. So the approach you take to the design system needs to reflect that. And luckily, these guys have seen a lot of organizations trying to put design systems in place. So they're able to identify what are going to be the blockers, what are going to be the gotchas and the minefields that we have to avoid. And then they collaborated with us in crafting the North Star vision, which we use to drive our leadership memo and communications with teams. And Dan led our team in early visual hypothesis creation and exploration so that we could really get the designers across the organization on board and excited for doing this. One deliverable of the engagement was a high-level roadmap that accounted for much of what needed to be accomplished and set some context around the order of operations. Since then, this is very schematic and rough, but since then it's become way more specific and robust. It's a series of epics and user stories that we manage within Jira. So now we're going to talk about assembling the team that builds and takes care of Forge.
Which has probably been my team. Mm-hmm. So I think to understand how and why we have the team that we do right now, I want to go through the relationship between how we envision the design system teams and our various product teams work. So the purpose of the design system team is really to focus on building and maintaining the design system. We're establishing design, the technology, the organizational architecture for Forge. We do that really difficult job of being the first to design, code, organize, document, market, demonstrate, kind of this new and better way of doing things. Someone's got to do it. That's us. So the product teams then kind of inherit this baseline work, and it's really, in our organization, work that no one product team is going to really be able to do because of the pressure to ship product features. I know because I was on one of those teams and tried to do a design system on the side, and that was very difficult to achieve and impossible to achieve for kind of a cross-company, cross-product role. So the product, though, still plays a critical role in the long-term health of the design system. We want them to feel like it's something that genuinely serves their interests and want to get their contributions to the overall growth of the platform. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think the lesson we learned here is that last point is easier for products to kind of agree on in principle than to execute. So this is the current design system Scrum team and the roles. It's changed over the course of the year, but by and large, the composition remains kind of these 5 circles. So I think designing and developing a system that powers the product experience for multiple products for years, you really need kind of a team with vision and talent. We went out and got the consultants, but at the end of the day, you need to build a team that's going to be able to drive this kind of day in and day out. So I think the most important thing is for the people on the team to really be able to reconcile cross-product demands with that core vision that you establish at the beginning for the quality and standards that you're trying to achieve. The team, every individual on the team really needs to be skilled in their craft, of course, but really diplomatic in their approach and creative in problem solving too, because you're going to encounter lots of differences of opinions of how something should be solved or represented. And so we have a term for this in our core competencies called situational adaptability, and that's really a skill that I think every member of my team has really had to exercise a lot in the first year. So specific to us, Athena Health Engineering is really overwhelmingly full stack development shop. That 800 and some people that Jen mentioned earlier, that's how we've hired them. So since we have a very different mission of improving UX and UI, we created a specific UX engineering role to power this initiative. And that UX engineer at Athena Health is really a front-end developer with a great aptitude and focus on superior design execution, or conversely, a designer with coding experience necessary to take a design through production implementation. So in our experience, the only UX engineering, really only the UX engineering role can implement a design vision without compromising the software engineering standards needed for components that we expect all products to eventually use. We need both of those things. I think my biggest regret throughout the first year of design systems work is really that we haven't been able to consistently staff with a copywriter and content designer. And the documentation is such a key part of the overall design system that I think we've struggled a bit to get that consistent high quality documentation where it falls to kind of everybody who's busy to do that work. I'm going to go into a little bit about kind of how we chose our technology. This is obviously a huge conference in and of itself, so we're not going to get too deep here, but this diagram represents systematically how Forge is being constructed and how we see its place in relation to all the other tech stacks that are happening at Athena Health. So we have design guidance primarily lives on our publicly facing Forge site. We have the visual design language that was a separate team that was informed the constructions of kind of style sheets and HTML and CSS assets, which are then kind of leveraged in a canonical representation of Forge in JavaScript. So we started this design system initiative. We tried to commit to a real technology agnostic approach. Stay as much as possible in that HTML, CSS sphere, only use as much JavaScript code as needed to kind of convey the interactions, but leave productization and specific interactions to product engineering teams. So as a 20-year-old kind of company with legacy systems, product acquisitions, and with their own technology base and subsystems built with different UI frameworks for various reasons, we really thought that technology agnostic approach made a lot of sense. But ultimately, we didn't end up doing that. Instead, we really realized that because our full stack developer team composition, what they really needed was precisely what a technology agnostic approach couldn't give them, which is that acceleration and quality that having pre-built components can provide, right? When you're on a team by yourself as a developer with no design resources, what you want to be able to do is to reach to that toolkit, get something built, and have that look good, work well. So we ended up choosing React as our default implementation of design systems components. We saw it as having a good balance between the capability of handling a cross-technology stack. The integration was good. The component methodology was something that really supported the way we wanted to do our future design efforts. And then the overall external ecosystem around that technology. So we did this not purely in isolation. We consulted what we call here a virtual architect team, or the VAD. And so the VAD basically exists as a number of senior architects to help steer significant technology decisions. And I think I bring this up here is just because we worked with them to evaluate a number of leading JavaScript framework candidates, within a legitimized process. That really allowed us to confidently proceed kind of with building a backlog of components without really worrying about having to somehow make a technology shift midway due to some unforeseen engineering issue. Which just brings us to this little bit. So one of the questions that we get a lot in technology is, why shouldn't my team just use Bootstrap instead of waiting for this design system to be done? And it's a fair question because it and a lot of other CSS frameworks are already done, right? You just download it, you do some customization, you should be ready to go, right? Let's think through this a bit. Buying everything sounds attractive, right? And by buying, I mean kind of downloading and using kind of off-the-shelf stuff. But the truth is that for any sufficiently complex enterprise application, there's likely to be things that are still missing. And then there's just kind of plain old opinion about how one component of the library is implemented, or saying that you want to use everything except these things, but not those things. And if you can enforce never building anything over time, and your application evolves really slowly, or you have a really simple governance requirement, then buying might be a good choice. I think for us, it didn't lead down a path that made that the best choice. Then there's kind of the other fatal attraction of kind of building everything. Everybody's excited about doing that. Engineers love it. I'll just say that you really want to avoid this. We've done this before. It's not pretty. It's not necessary. We'd be happy to discuss this more in Q&A if people have really strong opinions about this. But ultimately, we didn't think that there were a lot of reasons to go down this road. So what we did do was settle on buying the complex and building the simple. So buying the complex is obvious. Saves time, energy, reduces reinvention, saves lots of time. I think to some, building simple seems a little backwards. But I would submit that building the simple things are not only easy to develop, but they really pose all the interesting questions that need to be answered when you create a design system, your core design principles. So for example, how big should basic components be? What typefaces should you use? Are there any pervasive design metaphors like cards that you want to use? So when you buy all those things, you cede control over these fundamental design principles to a third party. In worst case, you have to do that work on that bot library to bring it all back into alignment. So we chose the curate. So we're going to talk about now a bit about how we actually got started. Like, what was the first thing that you decided to build, right? So I think the tricky thing about building a cross-product design system is that it's really easy for that design system to become dominated by a couple of really enthusiastic participants. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that some products will be in the right time and the right place in the roadmaps to leverage a new way of doing things, while others may lag by months or even years. Another problem is that just meeting the needs of existing products means that some essential foundational elements will never be a priority for any product team to address. So, for example, no product owner here is really going to be asking for a new input implementation or dialogues as a priority if they really need is an accordion to get their next release finished. And so, as we already discussed, these atomic building blocks, these small things, are actually the most critical in a nascent design system. So, you know, at the same time, it's also pointless to have a team building things that doesn't meet product needs or has real product integration to understand designers and developers' problems. So what we need to do is define and manage Forge as a really true third-party product while letting a number of products help create the initial feature backlog. So one of the first things we did after the initial consultation rounds was we put a call out for pilots. And the pilots would be our first users and provide the design systems and engineering team with really vital intelligence into what we should be having in our backlog. The pilots would also help us secure wins by showing the organization real success and real products versus just kind of demoware. So these are the product requirements on the slide. They sound simple and logical, but in practice, they can be tricky. What I thought would have taken no more than like 4 or 5 weeks to align really ended up taking twice as long in some cases. Number 2 and number 5 specifically forced out 2 pilots relatively early. We had enthusiastic support from one pilot early on, but due to other timings and Scrum team formation, design readiness, it really took a few months to settle on the right pilot project. So later on, another product team materialized, of course, overnight and had all the prerequisites, and we were working within 3 weeks. So it's all kind of a crapshoot in some cases, and you should kind of keep that in mind. I think at an enterprise scale, there really needs to be an emphasis again on that small agile mindset in program management, and being able to balance the objectives of a couple teams as well as the organizational strategy to kind of really make those go, no-go calls when something seems to be stalling out. So once we got kind of pilot steel threads resolved, we proceeded to work with those design teams and really look at the user interfaces, compose their planned or existing applications into those reusable pieces to be prioritized. Not everybody thinks about their user interfaces as reusable building blocks, so there's a lot of teaching and learning to be involved, and we'll talk about a little bit that later. But the general question is, how big can a piece of UI be and still be reusable? When do we define something as a component versus just a collection of smaller things? It's cross-product usable. There are interaction paradigms that are kind of invisible in static designs, but should be accounted for as part of the component. There's a lot of really meaty and interesting questions there. This just says, we coach teams and we had these discussions. We ultimately came back to us with, some inventories. We used that as the basis of our backlog. We ultimately ended up with around 40 things. That seems to be 40 to 60 seems to be a magic number among a lot of design systems for those things that are commonly used and broadly applicable. So then we just had a prioritization problem, which we resolved by really just balancing a number of different factors. One was one of the things we tried to do is group by focus, so that chunks of functionality were released as families of things, so at any time during a release of Forge, people could build something useful with a prototype of Forge, as opposed to kind of just disparate things that are nice in and of itself, but you can't do anything cohesive with it. And so you can't really do this if you prioritize building strictly on product current needs, right? You end up with, again, random things that aren't useful to any specific product. And so I think the last thing that we learned here is really is that there's no magical solution aside from solid communications between product owners and Scrum Masters of each team when you're trying to run a pilot program. The Forge teams made sure we understood the objectives of each pilot team and clearly identified who was responsible for doing what. We attended each other's sprint reviews, we coordinated pre-backlog grooming sessions and resolved dependencies. There was a huge amount of work. But having real users and the field test kind of product assumptions and challenge our own team's design and technical solutions and have those teams offer solutions proved really valuable. It was much easier to keep the design system program running when there were teams kind of eager to adopt it and contribute to it and really demonstrate its usefulness to product leadership. So I think in the last section, we're going to go over kind of some of our strategies for after kind of almost a year running, how do we get teams to really use this for real? What might be some of the governance challenges? And then how, when we talk about contribution, are we taking these things in from all these other product teams?
So just again, to set the stage, I wanted to talk about change management. So like I said earlier, our existing design and development practices require designers and developers to spend much of their time, well, this is specific to designers, really defining and redefining standard elements of user interfaces and creating a lot of documentation to describe those user interfaces so that developers have specific build instructions. Also problematic is that the resulting coded interfaces are oftentimes not faithful to the design specification that these designers have lovingly labored over. And designers end up spending countless hours working with developers pleading for front-end code adjustments. And sometimes they just go ahead and write the CSS themselves to fix it. So in order to improve the user-facing end result, they're taking it into their own hands. And this way of working is just filled with issues. It's not agile. It's not lean. It results in really poor user interfaces. It encourages special snowflake design and code for elements that simply shouldn't be unique. And it can result in multiple implementations of the same user interface element and create increased software maintenance costs. Despite the painfulness of this reality that I just described, there are going to be people for whom, when you suggest changing to a design system, what we consider to be a better way, is unwelcome news. So in particular, it's not unusual for designers to measure their work product, their outcomes and output by the documentation and artifacts they create. So if you talk to a designer about, this system is amazing, you won't have to create wireframes anymore, or, specifications or mocks, they're like, well, what do I do? And so what we're trying to do, also through our agile transformation and adoption of lean methods, is get people to be designing collaboratively in a room, sketching things out on whiteboards and then going and building prototypes so that we can run minimum viable product experimentation to prove and disprove hypotheses. And so that landscape is different. A lot of designers, are moving into that, but it's not familiar to anyone. So it's vital for us to be honest with ourselves and recognize this discomfort. It's not just enough to say, hey, you'll get over it. You can deal with it. And this discomfort isn't just for designers, but anyone who's impacted by our product. So we decided we needed a deliberate and intentional approach to ensuring successful adoption of this design system and really any of the initiatives that we work on in design ops. And so we referenced John Kotter's classic 8 steps of change to help us think this through more carefully. And we will check our product plans and our memos against this. Like, are we properly creating a climate for change? Is there urgency around this? Can we give people reasons to want to do this versus stay with the status quo? Creating the coalition, people who are going to be supporters of this, the builders, the early adopters, developing the vision and strategy, communicating that vision really well and really often. Sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, everyone at this company must be so sick of me saying the same things over and over and over again. But regardless, despite that, there's still going to be people who surface who are like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this effort. I never knew that you guys were doing design quality scoring, or I never knew about Forge. So even if you feel like you're being annoying, keep going. You need to be annoying plus in order for the message to be out there enough. Empowering action is really important. So what can people do to help this initiative move forward? And then getting those quick wins. This is, Carl was talking about the pilots. You need that in order to show, hey, this is useful. People can use this. Oh, and by the way, they were also able to create some components and contribute them back into the system. So starting to show those things, highlight those examples, show off what the products are building. And then leveraging wins to drive change and embedding this in the culture, making this part of what we do. Right now we have, because Forge is going out with its version 1 in March, on March 16th, we have a corporate communication strategy that we are working with and collaborating with corporate communications to make that happen. It's through multiple channels. It's going out for our intranet. We have all of our Slack channels. We'll have road shows, Athena talks. We'll use any venue that we can to make sure we're getting this message out. So some of the things that we think about as well. So we use Kotter's model. Some of the things we apply to make Kotter's model come to life. So moving an R&D organization to use a design system basically is a product switch. So just like any product out on the market, if you're asking someone to adopt your new thing versus using their old thing, there's some things to consider there. They may be switching from nothing. They may be switching from a third-party library. Nonetheless, they view this as a switch, and so should you. So you get your marketing heads on and be very clear about the problems with the current methods, the attraction of using the shiny new design system, and the terrible consequences of the existing habits and behaviors, and get really crisp on what you're going to do to make this non-scary. Some of the examples that we have, thinking about the problems with the current product. So we have outdated development methodologies for creating UI, and all of that tangled together, tightly coupled with our Perl code. Attractiveness is something else we can go after for developers. React is the cool kid at Athena right now, and it's valuable for us to be able to talk about that, to recruit developers to Athena, but also to get them, developers who exist at Athena, to adopt this cool thing. And then anxiety, how do we relieve that? You know, we promise to help you. We have Slack channels, you can reach out. They're 24-hour basically. We can advise you on how to deal with your problems. We have hands-on support, and we're creating other programs for that. So is this me or you? Okay, great.
So one of the things I think that we realized that we needed to make sure that we had, right at the beginning, was just to have a really core set of guiding principles, so that you can make all these key decisions. And by that I mean there's all sorts of decisions, from what components include, how much latitude is allowed to consistency standards, to kind of technical approaches, right? So for example, there may be some interim variations to a component in order to transition a product along from the current visuals to new design systems. You could take the hard line on visuals. Taking the hard line on visuals might, sacrifice long-term adoption by the product. Which do you value if the variation is on a widget that's part of, that core set of things? So the answers will always be case by case, but having these kind of principles identified up front at least narrows kind of the scope of the conversation. So these are kind of governing principles, the team is aiming to follow and it has followed. We're focusing the Scrum team on kind of core reusable parts. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's basically those small elements I was talking about earlier. We'd rather see you use the system and create new components that you need now than be too dogmatic and forbid components or hold up product development because we want to double, triple check on how we feel about things. We want to aim minimizing the amount of variations and any forking of kind of what we're calling the Forge core, again, these base 40. And it's okay if someone makes product-specific components with the Forge core parts, which we call extensions. But one of our key adoption messages is really, the design system is not a mechanism to exert control. It's about providing just enough creative and development constraints that people have a framework that they can do their work more efficiently. We're not trying to be everything. You can use the things that are not in Forge. Let's take a look at that. So in kind of the Brad Frost taxonomy of patterns, Forge core focuses mainly on the atoms and molecules, with maybe a few organisms. We know from software engineering practice that reuse in the small is a solved problem, but reuse in the large is very difficult. So Forge core focuses on all those atoms and molecules of UI building. So ideally, when you're using Forge to create product-specific user interfaces, you're building mostly from these atoms and molecules in Forge core. These are, again, those fundamental 40 components, right? Cross-product user interfaces, broadly applicable. We focus on this set also because they're the things most likely to be reinvented by our product teams, and they really form the bulk of the visuals in any given user interface, as we discussed earlier in the kind of buy build analysis. And those things that are extensions, we let the product teams handle more. They're combining the atoms, molecules, and organisms to kind of create new product patterns that are specific to them. Again, along how do you get this adoption, right? So we just talked about having good governance model by which to make decisions so that it could be clearly communicated to stakeholders. Another is just, straight out outreach and education. And we know from discussions with various Scrum teams that designing to a design system can be a new way for people to work, and there's fear and doubt, as Jen was talking about. So we felt it's especially important to establish the constraints and communicate why they're there, show people how they work with that system, and because of that, designing with a component approach and perspective, i.e. how to compose and decompose user interfaces such that designers are creating those things that are easy to engineer, rank really high in, I think, training that we're going to try and push, right? So these are all, proposed, seminar topics, post our initial rollout that we want to run with. Other initiatives that we're thinking, on the training end of it and outreach is really have, that pair program or designing under the banner of apprenticeships. And this is really about getting product designers and developers excited to work on Forge by bringing their specific work, right? Not toy examples, not just sample source in seminars and lectures. We're really currently envisioning about one designer or developer per sprint working with product equivalents kind of on a sign-up basis, and then we'll scale that up or down as needed. And as Jen already mentioned, there's kind of endless promotional work here that can be done for an organization our size. We definitely plan to recognize code and design contributions through swag, showcases on Wake, or just calling it out in our sprint reviews. Consider panels, Q&As with teams, maybe podcasts. I think the seminars and apprenticeships themselves are a promotion. And I think we certainly plan to do more than we have at this point as a lesson. But I think at minimum, like we were talking about, we've always staffed at least 2 Slack channels diligently, made sure everybody knows that this is a thing that's actively being worked on. I think more than anything, that's really the lesson. This here just needs constant talking about. And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about our contribution process that we've been talking about. And this itself could be probably a whole seminar. I will say that it's for those who are familiar with coding and open source development, our component contribution process is directly modeled on the Git source control model. It's got a couple advantages. One, it's a process that's really familiar to developers that use Git, which is a lot of people now. And it offers transparency to stakeholders about the status of our contributions due to our use of GitLab. I think now we're going to the big bucket. I guess I'm part of the Atlassian. There's issues trackers and Jira and stuff like that. People can get in and out really quick without us having to stand out additional systems. I think the thing to note here really is that right now, as soon as the design systems team is giving time to handle the pull requests, and so we haven't done as good of a job as we need so far during kind of the gestation stage of Forge, but we're planning to up our game to an expected rate of turnaround time of kind of 2 weeks or under from the initial pull request coming in to us being able to respond some way. It also assumes the roadmap is centrally coordinated by the design systems team to prevent kind of duplicate pull requests. We hope that this is going to be a little less than necessary over time, but initially you need to have that control because no one else is familiar with working in this model at Athena Health anyways. And right now the going assumption is that all of Forge core is a single repository. It's certainly been talked about as Forge progresses and different components get different uptake and different speeds of refactors of variation, that this could be broken down to separate repositories, perhaps along kind of a node package model. People are familiar with that, where each component is essentially a repo in and of itself that would exercise this process. Where are we?
We're here.
Here's measurement.
So it's really important to us. So the other piece of governance is making sure that teams are using Forge correctly, that they're designing things that are Forgey, that aren't some weird creation that isn't truly Forge, or maybe they're misinterpreting the principles. That said, we've chosen not to make the Forge design team the design police. That's not the role we want them playing. We certainly want them involved in the contribution, creating the ecosystem for that, the processes and the approach. But we want that team to be really focused as well on building out more components and partnering with teams to use Forge. So we have a mechanism for evaluating the Forginess of the things that are being built. And so we have this thing called the Experience Measurement Framework. It's an overlay of measures that sits on top of our product development lifecycle. And we're using one piece of that, if you hit that button. So when we're in alpha beta, we can actually use this evaluation that we run, that's a design quality measurement, to make sure that they are using Forge components, that they're using them correctly. So if you go to the next slide, our design quality measure is based on Jacob Nielsen's 10 heuristics for interface design. So last year we spent about 9 sprints evaluating 55 mission critical workflows across AthenaNet. And we go back, as those workflows get added to backlogs and get worked on in sprints, we go back to see those teams and rescore their workflows to see if their redesigns are bumping the scores up. And we also score, as a service, net new workflows that are being added to AthenaNet. So we use the 10 heuristics that Jacob created many years ago. And what we're doing this year is adding an 11th, which is Forge adherence. And so we hope that folding that into the adherence for measuring design quality will be the way that we can check to make sure that Forge is being used correctly. And it's also getting the traction that we want to see with all of this workflow redesign and net new workflow work.
I love that heuristic score. Take
11. Take it to 11. So how are we going to measure success? All of our initiatives in design ops, including the design system, must have well-defined, tracked, and reported success metrics. Athena is very obsessed with operational metrics, and so we've had to work very hard in design to create metrics to measure design. That's why we have the experience measurement framework, and that's why Forge also has to have some metrics associated with it. So we thought about 3 different metrics. We did a lot of brainstorming. These are the 3 that we came up with around summer of last year. The first one is measuring the robustness of the library. So how big can we make this library? The drawback there is you could have a very big library, but no adoption. So that doesn't really tell us anything that impacts the business. The next metric focuses on community engagement through contributions, which is interesting because it helps us measure engagement and interest. But again, it's not a direct link to adoption and usage. And that's what we really need to be looking at. So we need to be a bit more obvious in the metric that we pick. So what we ended up going with is, for 2018, we focused on utilization. So we're still going to track contributions and engagement, but the use of the system in production code that's used by our end users is the most important aspect at the moment. So for the numerator, we are using features as defined at readiness review. Readiness review is the thing we have right before something goes GA. We have that 3 times a year because we have 3 general availability releases. So there's a big inventory of everything that's going out GA. We can go through those things and check when they got their design quality score that they were using Forge in the first place, and second of all, to what degree they were using Forge. So we'll be able to see that in this calculation. And then if you go to the next slide, Carl, I just wanted to summarize. So what we're looking for Q2 is to be at 15% of the features going out will be using Forge elements, and that's going to grow throughout the year so that we end up at the end of the year, the last release of the year, at 50%. And we're hoping, we're crossing our fingers and hoping that all the efforts that we have in place will get us to that number, and that we'd hope that that number is realistic. But that's our story so far. That's what we have, and we're willing to open it up for any and all questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen and Carl, for taking the time to share your experience and knowledge. We do have some questions coming in. We only have about 10 more minutes left, so not sure if we'll be able to go through all of them, but we'll do our best.
Try.
Perfect. So let's get started on the questions here. Somebody was asking if you could give us an example of a component that you decided to buy instead of build, and how did you arrive at that decision?
Yeah, that's easy. Data grid. So a giant table-like component that needs to sort and column realign, inline editing, support multiple data formats. That is just traditionally a hard thing for a team to build right from ground up, and there were fortunately good alternatives lying around the web.
Okay, makes sense. And do you have any teams adopting Forge early before release to not only test it, try it, but to help create early wins?
Yes, we actually have a problem of too many teams wanting to adopt early, which presents its own challenges. So we, in addition to the pilot programs, which ran with 2 official products, kind of building with very early builds of Forge, at the end of, I think, last year or the beginning of this year, we also rolled out an early adopter program, which I think netted 6 candidates, products, workflows, which wanted to use Forge. I think we vetted that down to 5 based on the number of early adopters that our team could actually support, and we ran with them. And so we co-designed with them. We worked with their engineers on an as-needed basis to kind of understand what problems they were facing with the architecture, and of course report any bugs. So the answer is definitely yes.
Okay, great. And do you have any advice for companies with a lot of design and technical debt? How do you get people to actually buy in on getting onto a design system, and how do you tackle that debt?
There's at least 2 parts to this question.
Okay, you start.
Yeah, I think so. If I'm getting this right, so how do you? There's the technical debt, and there's the buy-in for the design system. So our company also has a significant amount of technical debt. I think my answer might be a little unique to us. I think since so much of our code base is on Perl, it actually hasn't been too difficult for us to drive Forge adoption over to a kind of a Node and React.js based infrastructure, because to be quite honest, it's just a world of productivity improvement and a world of being able to kind of mine the knowledge of the internet. As Jen was mentioning earlier, it's kind of the cool thing to do, and it all that rolls into to us not having to do too much evangelizing as far as just getting on the line engineering to kind of want to try this stuff. I think the bigger resistance has been from perhaps the UX and program management side of things, right? So design product teams obviously have investments in their existing look and feels. It is not without challenges to migrate over to a new technology infrastructure, which includes a new visual design language. So we've had to, and still continue to work very closely with engineering, product, and UX leadership, to solve those very tricky problems. So, well, are we okay with having a screen with 2 different design languages on it in the interim? And that's stuff that just needs to be worked on a case-to-case basis. But I think overall, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jen. People agree in principle that moving over to Forge is a good and necessary thing, and that's part and parcel of a large amount of that workflow analysis work that I think user research did before, and really pushed to product management, and really underscored what our challenges are relative to NPS score and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, when we looked at the 55 workflows, which now has climbed over the year, it's I think up over 70 now. The heuristic that was like burning us the most was consistency and standards. So we're using lots of patterns and interactions that are not standard out in the rest of the world. And not only that, but those unique snowflake interactions are not even consistent across the product within itself. And a lot of that, can be traced back to, yeah, there's many different teams working on things. Maybe the coordination and communication isn't good, but also you have level of effort issues. So you might have an engineer on one team that has lots of time and can invest the effort, maybe has some front-end development code experience and says they can build something for the designer that they've specified. And on another team, level of effort is deemed too far. So it should be the same element, should be the same component, ends up being like, you know, it's kind of held together with duct tape and chicken wire instead. And so it's just like rationalizing that has been, it's something that everyone notices really needs to happen. So it's really helpful to have the quality scores and the workflows to have done that heuristic evaluation so we can point to the numbers. The numerical stuff helps for us here because we're very operationally metric focused. And so, so we can create that sense of urgency and get people on board.
Hey, great, thank you so much. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. And one of our viewers is wondering what the most difficult aspect of maintaining the design system so far has been, and what parts of your process will have to change as the adoption increases significantly.
Yeah, let me answer that last part first. I think because we strive to run this as an open contribution model, the biggest change for my team will be to pivot from you know, the mindset of doing all the work to helping shepherd other teams to contribute and kind of really bringing them along to help do the work. That's the only way that this is scalable, you know, for us. If the requirement is for us to have 50 people to run design systems forever, that counts as a fail for us.
Yeah.
Because we just don't have that kind of resources. So that's the thing that I think is going to be the biggest delta for us operationally. As far as, you know, what was the biggest challenge of maintaining it so far? Was that the question?
Maintaining it in the future.
Yes.
As the contributions grow.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we had, and because of our striving to be an open model with a lot of kind of early adoption and stuff like that, is that you know, you can spend a lot of time debating and kind of vetting, you know, technical solutions, design solutions, and, you know, in an effort to kind of get everything right. And so I think that one of our failings has been, you know, we did that, we put out something, and then we found out almost immediately that there was this other case, you know, somewhere that forced us to kind of go back to the drawing board. So if I had to do it again, I would invest a little less time on pre-architecture and you know, again, just try to get it out there a little bit, you know, quicker than we did. Because once you get out there, and even if you only have a handful of things, you know, a change that requires touching every single component you've done so far is never, you know, easy, even if it's just you know, a dozen or so.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer. And one last question. Being that you're in a very heavily regulated health industry, did you receive any pushback from IT to use tools or technology, especially ones that allow collaboration or are cloud-based? And if so, how did you convince leadership to actually allow usage and move on?
So this design system is used within Athena Health. Just to be clear, it's not open source to the rest of the world to build on our platform yet. As far as cloud-based,
yeah,
I don't think we have that problem. No, we don't. I don't think we have that problem. We build cloud-based health IT solutions, healthcare technology solutions. So we're already, Athena Health is one of the first companies that has that single instance out in the cloud that all of our clients use. Unlike other EHR systems like Cerner and Epic that sit kind of in a walled garden, they're on-prem installs. So we generally don't have to have conversations about that because we already figured that out like 20 years ago. But there wasn't any. Yeah. So just to be clear too with our organization, so ET, Enterprise Technology, they do have influence over what tools we use across the organization, like WebEx or or, you know, Slack, like being able to use Slack and stuff, but they don't have jurisdiction over making decisions for R&D, which is what we are. So that's engineering, product management, and design.
Yeah. We're also a pure SDK play, right? So our components are used to build user interfaces, but you know, anything that is, you know, likely to be a security concern or anything is more of the platform infrastructure and back-end teams.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the insights. So I think our time is up, but we wanted to thank everyone again for joining. And thank you, Jen and Carl, for answering all of our questions. And we do have another session of the summit coming up in 30 minutes. So hope you guys can join us. And thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.